this debate today, I spoke to my children. After all, the world and all of its fragile beauty is what our generation will pass on to the next. And as elected representatives, we have a moral obligation to do our utmost to ensure the world that we pass on to them is peaceful, inclusive, healthy and full of life. I would like to think my parents and grandparents had this wish too for us, with the knowledge that they had in their time. And this is an obligation we should all take extremely seriously with the science and knowledge that we have today. I asked my children what inaction on climate change meant to them, and the consensus was quite clearly a distrust of politicians, should I say, my children, and businesses to do anything with the urgency that they sincerely felt, and with true intent to change the climate disaster they will face much more than us. They really did not have hope that overall we had a grasp of it. They're my greatest critics. They are fearful and they need assurances that we are doing all we can. But like many across the world, and even some on the Conservative benches in this place, I was truly dispirited by the Prime Minister's statement last week. His betrayal of the current generations, of my children and grandchildren, and of generations to come is truly unforgivable. He should hang his head in shame, as anyone who dares to defend the indefensible or who stays silent when our climate and environment are crying out for help. Presiding Officer, during my 2.5 years as a parliamentarian, I have taken a keen interest in food security, both as a member of the Scottish Parliament's Rural Affairs Committee and as a proud representative of a coastal and rural constituency. And I know the essential role fisheries and agriculture play, not only to our economy and our culture, but to the availability and secure supply of sufficient, safe and nutritious food. And it's clear that the twin crises of climate change and biodiversity loss pose an undeniable threat to the security of our food and nutrition. Across the world, we are already witnessing slowed agricultural productivity as a result of the effects of climate change, and this, along with Russia's war in Ukraine, is stoking further food insecurity.
The challenge that climate change and biodiversity loss poses to our planet is absolutely immense. So I'm pleased that Parliament is debating this incredibly important issue today. Climate change isn't something coming down the line or something that will happen in the future if we don't buck up our ideas. It's already here and it's causing devastation across the world. Scotland, and in particular my constituents in Aberdeen Donside, have benefited from employment in the oil and gas industry over the decades. We are a resource-rich nation and we have all felt the benefits of that. Now, however, we need to push forward a just transition, ensuring we utilise the skills and expertise in the oil and gas sector to ensure we become the renewables capital of Europe, or even the world. But we all have so much more to do. Let us take a look at how climate change is affecting Scotland. Scotland since 2000 has had 9 of the 10 warmest years on record. 9 out of 10 since records began. That is not something to be proud of. That's extremely worrying. The future is likely to hold warmer, wetter summers, with more storms, flooding and periods of drought, and winters will be milder. This has a devastating toll on industry. According to a WWF study, the impacts to the farming sector in 2017-18 included sheep farmers suffering the biggest losses of approximately £45 million when the beast from the east hit during their lambing season. Beef producers seeing a huge increase to the cost of feed of approximately £28 million as cattle were kept inside for longer during the bad weather and grass growth was low during the dry summer. Cereal crops were also significantly impacted, with total production and yields down in 2018 due to the poor weather conditions at key points in the growing season, a cost to the farmer of approximately £34 million. At the UK level, wholesale prices of some staples like carrots, lettuce and onions rose up to 80%. These extreme events are likely to become more frequent and severe as our climate continues to change.
And flood has taken the lives and livelihoods of so many people. It's been impossible to ignore. And it's the first year when I've looked at my own children and felt fearful for what the decades ahead will be like for them to actually live through. But we must also not forget the impact climate change is having on the natural world. Increasing temperatures, extreme weather and invasive species are threatening ecosystems with collapse. 2023 has been a year where videos of climate protesters slowing cars have been watched alongside videos of cars being swept away by flash floods. We're at a tipping point in public consciousness, but it's also a dangerous time, a time when those who feel powerless or disbelieving can turn to dangerous conspiracies and denialism about climate and even about democracy itself. We need honest leadership about both the challenges and the opportunities that lie ahead, free from the agendas of vested interests who wish to slow or reverse change. So many people felt disillusioned by the Prime Minister's climate climb-down last week because there was not a shred of honest leadership in that announcement. Standing at a plinth that read long-term decisions for a brighter future, he announced short-term decisions that will destroy the future. He described the need for change, and for a second I almost felt quite hopeful. But then he cancelled or delayed the programmes which are delivering the change that is necessary. The very policies that he was elected to deliver, policies that had been extensively consulted on for years, cancelled or delayed. He then quite incredibly scrapped a range of policies from compulsory car sharing to meat taxes that don't even exist. It was a level of doublethink not seen since 1984. But the government motion today rightly acknowledges that Scotland is halfway towards net zero, but that the hardest part is still to come.
Can I begin, Presiding Officer, with what I think is the absolute core of this debate, which is that there has to be a deep understanding, and Mr Ruskell made this point, and acceptance of the gravity of the threat and the seriousness of that we face from climate change. And for me, this was illustrated by the comments of the United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres on the 27th of July, when he said these words: "Humanity is in the hot seat. According to the data released today, July has already seen the hottest three-week period ever recorded, the 3 hottest days on record, and the highest ever ocean temperatures for this time of year. The consequences are clear and they are tragic. Children swept away by monsoon rains, families running from the flames, workers collapsing in scorching heat. For vast parts of North America, Asia, Africa and Europe, it is a cruel summer. For the entire planet, it is a disaster. And for scientists, it is unequivocal. Humans are to blame. All this is entirely consistent with predictions and repeated warnings. The only surprise is the speed of the change."
I now call Christine Graham to be followed by Colin Smith. Around 6 minutes, Ms Graham.
It's almost inexplicable that we still have global warming deniers. And who better to quote than perhaps the Donald Trumps of this world, who claimed, and I quote, "When I listen to people talk about global warming, that the ocean will rise in the next 300 years by 1/8 of an inch, and they talk about this is our problem, the environmentalists talk about all this nonsense." In a further podcast interview, he said of 1/8 of an inch over 300 years, "When I see these people talking about global warming, where the ocean will rise by 1/100th of an inch over the next 350 years, well, he's not even consistent in his idiocy. But of course, he represents the Mad Max of society. The reality is that the Federal National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, has, and I note, that said that the global sea level is currently rising at about 1/8 of an inch per year. In other words, the sea level rise Trump claimed say will happen over 300 years is actually happening annually. And I also referenced John Swinney's contribution in this regard. But we don't even need NOAA pronouncements. From the raging global fires, droughts and floods across the world, the disappearing Arctic ice, to the very weird seasons in my own tiny garden, global warming is here and accelerating and very scary. And if not, it should be.